Welcome to Revolution Against Evolution. I'm your host, Doug Sharp.
I'm your co-host, Rich Gear, here with you, and we're dealing with Copernicus today, right, Doug? And et al. And other things, right?
Yeah, Copernicus, Galileo, and the problem of geocentricity versus heliocentricity, which is the idea that the Earth revolves around the sun.
And the hit the church has taken the last few hundred years because of those two guys, right? But really not because of those two guys, it's because of propaganda as far as I'm concerned, but go ahead. You know?
Well, it was, what we really have is a straw man argument. It's the claim that of evolutionists that scientific progress has been harmed by the church, impeding the scientific progress because they say that the Bible says that the sun revolves around the earth, and but that's not what the Bible says. And there was one of the evolutionists. Here's an example. He says this: when Nicholas Copernicus proposed this heliocentric model, not surprisingly, it met with great hostility from the church, which held that God had created a universe with the earth at its heart. And
we'll get to that a little bit later, Doug, because that's kind of interesting. Right. But be that as it may, I like that this with the earth at its heart. There may be more truth as we find out for other reasons, but the solar system is not that reason. So
here's another quote. There's a article that Dr. Jerry Bergman quotes in his article about it in the Creation Research Society Quarterly. He claimed that when he documented his idea in his 1543 book, he says the problem was the church stated that God had put the earth at the center of the universe. And you could be put to death for saying the earth went around the sun. They added that few scientists were brave enough to say that they agreed with Copernicus's finding that the earth went around the sun. Galileo was, and he was put on trial for his ideas in 1634.
I was interesting, Doug, just as a caveat there. I don't remember Copernicus facing as much animosity as Galileo did later, quite frankly. Copernicus, he probably did get some, but I mean, I know it was a revolutionary idea, but the things I read about Copernicus, and it wasn't as much.
Well, Wikipedia gets it right.
Does it really?
We'll talk about it later here. There's another guy, Richard Bozarth, who's another evolutionist. He claimed that Christianity seriously impeded the progress of science with the church's fight against Copernicus. And in Omni magazine, it says, once a religion becomes politically powerful, it suppresses all heretical teachings. And then there's Robert Heinlein, and he predicted that the United States would be ruled by religious dictatorship in the 21st century. This was a few decades ago when he said this.
Yeah.
And then back in the 1800s, there was a president of Cornell University. His name was Andrew White. He promoted he's the first one to promote the idea that the church impeded the progress of science. And he's widely quoted today, though his thesis has actually been thoroughly refuted. And there's the great-great-grandson of Darwin.
Oh, yeah.
His name is Matthew Chapman, and he also repeats this error in some of the things he has written.
You know, what's interesting about that, Doug, is that so many of these people repeat these errors. I mean, yeah, there was some I would say some legitimate, or if you will, even illegitimate controversy when you come up with there, but both from scientists and the church, and quite frankly, I think the church was as much, a lot of them were more in line to possibly support what he was saying.
Well, it was the Pope at the time, Leo X. He supported Copernicus and invited him to help devise a new calendar.
And maybe that's why I remember that what Copernicus does not face quite with as much hostility as Galileo was.
Right.
But be that as it may, The fact is, what I also noticed, Doug, and this may be a sidebar here, but I noticed that oftentimes the geocentric, heliocentric controversy gets conflated with flat Earth.
Yeah, it does.
This happens a lot, and there's nothing to do with each other whatsoever. I don't know really, really much of anybody that's actually from the church has supported that. But the fact of the matter is that the Ptolemaic Center was actually a pagan idea anyway.
Yeah, it
Okay.
was all based upon astrology.
It wasn't based on Christianity or the Bible.
The Greek mythology. Now, Copernicus wasn't really the first one to propose a heliocentric model.
I didn't know that.
And there was two guys in the 1300s. One was John Bergman. He lived from 1300 to 1358, and Nicole Orsmy, he lived also in the 1300s. And these two guys had no opposition to their ideas, although when they were published, the church didn't say much about it.
Well, obviously didn't get a big foothold. It seems to me when Copernicus had better telescopes, some better ideas.
Telescopes really didn't come around
Was it
until
Galileo?
Galileo. Yeah.
Maybe that's what it was, but because how did Copernicus do?
Well, he was just a good observer, just from the basis of astronomy as he kept records,
Okay.
because even with your observation without a telescope, you can still see a lot of motions and everything like that.
Okay.
And we can maybe go back to Ptolemy, who was the Greek...
Ptolemy?
Ptolemy, whatever his name is.
It's just Ptolemy.
Yeah. He was the one who first proposed this idea in his work called Almagest, which is a very respected work. And if you take a look at it, there's a lot of science in it. There's a lot of geometry that goes into it, how he comes up with this system.
Oh yeah, he was quite an amazing scholar. He really was.
And his work stuck around for 1,500 years. You had people like Aristotle that promoted it, and it was based upon the observations without...
Well, I don't think Aristotle promoted it, because Aristotle came along before Ptolemy. Okay. Aristotle was like 300 BC, and Ptolemy was like the 2nd century AD or something like that.
Well, Aristotle and
they may have thought of a geocentric universe,
right.
But Ptolemy actually did the mathematical calculations.
Right.
I think Aristotle was more of a philosopher. So yeah, it was in other words, Ptolemy didn't invent the geocentric universe.
Right.
Okay?
He didn't.
But he made the mathematical equations.
The Greeks back then figured out that the Earth was round because they saw the shadows on the moon during eclipses.
Okay.
And actually, Eratosthenes was a fellow who figured out the diameter of the Earth.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And so those Greek guys did a pretty good job on that. But if you look at who was actually opposing Copernicus, was Tycho Brahe. He was the lead astronomer at the time, and he was the one who, for years, opposed Copernicus's model. It wasn't the church. It was the reigning academicians at the time.
Okay.
And when Harvard University was established, I think it was in 1636 or something.
Yes,
like
16. That's what I think.
they were teaching geocentricity at the time.
Okay.
And if you look beyond that to the time of Newton, you see a lot of the things that weren't discovered by then. There's a lot of laws that weren't understood in those centuries.
You know, the thing, Doug, what really gets me, these guys, they have an axe to grind, so they want to hammer the church. Look, you can hammer the middle-aged church for a lot of reasons, but this is not really a good one. The fact of the matter is, Doug, the scientific community is very stubborn.
Right.
When new ideas come in, medical science is horrible. George Washington bled to death because they wouldn't use the new techniques. They said, well, we had the best knowledge. No, they didn't use what was known. It's how many times the guy was it Lister or was another guy who was talk about washing your hands to prevent disease, medical science. But it's not only that; it's just new ideas. Really have a hard time, oftentimes, getting involved in it. I think that's why creation right now we're having such a difficult time because Darwinism has been entrenched for so long. I'm convinced if there was anything that you atheists had besides evolution, you'd throw it out because evolution is so chock full of holes and problems. But you have nothing else to intellectually fulfill you as an atheist. But the fact of the matter is that but the church takes this hit. But the scientists themselves, as you just relayed, Tycho Brahe, or how do you pronounce it? Tycho Brahe. Yeah. Anyway, the academicians were really, or the scientists of the day were as much as entrenched in their earlier. I mean, let's face it, 1,500 years of a way of thinking, and then this guy comes out and says, think something totally different. Is not really going to set very well.
Now, if you take in terms of the Bible doesn't talk about the sun revolving around the earth. It talks about sunrise and sunset, but we talk about that ourselves. And if you think about it, all motion is actually relative. If you can pick any point that you want in the universe and define all the motions in relationship to that point. So what is the fixed point is the point that you define it as.
Oftentimes, yeah. In fact, that's the one, Doug, they do use from the biblical thing in the Joshua's long day when the sun stood still. Yeah. I said, well, what are you going to... As I said, we don't call it an earth move. We call it a sunset. We call it a sunrise. And the fact of the matter is, from Joshua's vantage point, the sun stayed in the heavens, and he was able to fight the battle. Now, how that could have happened, Doug, is beyond any kind of... That's a miracle, flat out. We talked about that a couple of shows ago, Doug. I mean, there are times we as believers have to just say, it's a miracle. I'm not going to try to explain certain things from naturalistic phenomena because I don't have an explanation. And I know that sort of begs the question, but the fact of the matter is you evolutionists don't have an explanation for how life spontaneously generated from properties inherent in matter either. So don't tell me that. And you have no explanation for how a microscopic pinprick can form all the matter in the universe either. So there are things, we have certain axioms, and we accept the fact as believers that there are such things as miracles. But that's not the same thing as saying that the sun revolved around the earth. It's not the same at all. And actually, I'm just kind of putting an exclamation point on what you just said. But
and I sort of give some of my friends a little bit of a rough time. I tell them that I believe in Doug-centrism. And that means that if I get up and walk around, like this, and the earth is moving under me, You
mean the earth doesn't revolve around me? What's up with that,
And then there's another thing, maybe galaxy centrism. If you actually understand that the sun is moving, then the sun and all of the solar system is actually moving in a vortex. And there's and it's really cool. There's a video online on YouTube that talks about that. And you have this vortex of things going in a spiral motion all throughout the universe. And
how awesome is that?
It's really kind of a neat little thing. Look it up on YouTube sometime. It's kind of fun.
What, the galaxy vortex, or what's it?
But they're also talking about that. It's a logarithm. It's a spiral. Kind of a motion, and it's sort of like a logarithmic spiral because of the way it's moving. And so a lot of the things in the universe is this logarithmic spiral, and like the Filary seas we talked about.
I know, yeah. That's not the Fibonacci thing, is it? Is there anything? The numbers that go out always like
Fibonacci numbers. Sequence. It is kind of like that.
I don't know whether it's the same or not. I just say come to my mind. The thing is, Doug, we've talked about this other thing, and I won't dwell on this either. There's an incredible thing that's out there right now, and it's been out there for quite a while now. You and I first heard about it 20 years ago, and then we went at the creation convention. Was it 2 years ago or last year? No, it was last year.
Last year.
We found it, and they talked about the idea that in point of fact, we may indeed be virtually at the center of the universe.
Right,
You know,
yeah.
the church may have gotten, even the stubborn ones might have actually sort of gotten, we're not the center of the solar system, but they've calibrated based on the stars that seem to be surrounding the Earth. You know, from the telescopes you can look out, and there seems to be shells.
This is beyond the galaxy. It's
Right.
talking about the
You're talking about the universe here.
Yeah.
We're really, and you got these shells, and then there's dark matter, and I'm being simplistic here, and then there's another thing of shells, a shell of stars, and so far they've gone off seven layers, and part of it, I have to tell you, now the biblical frame of reference comes in. You know, it's like there were 7 days. It's like, you know, think of it like you put a pebble in a body of water, and you get the ripples that come out, right?
Right.
I think on the first day, God said a shell of stars, and the second day, boom, it's like these. And I get this visual thing in my, granted it's sort of romantic, but I go, but the issue is that they're trying to right now do away with explanations for why we would see this.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, and one at the time that I would gone to the convention, Doug, had been eliminated as possible.
Mm-hmm.
They don't explain it away. The only explanation, if the third thing, and I you know, turns out to be valid then, or not an explanation, then we are at the center of the universe, or virtually. And that's kind of an amazing thing, because we are the apple of God's eye. This is a way different viewpoint. I just, again, another sidebar. The difference between a creationist viewpoint and an evolutionary viewpoint is basically your pond scum at the end of millions of years of random chance and happenstance. It's meaningless. Nothing is worthwhile. You know, but a creationist says we are the apple of God's eye, and we were His plan from the beginning. And it's interesting, Doug. Copernicus never denied that.
Right.
Neither did Galileo.
Copernicus was actually a administrator in the church.
Yeah, they were very strong believers.
And
so, yeah.
you know, Newton and Galileo and Copernicus all were Bible believers.
I just think that would be ironic, Doug, if it turns out that this thing comes out and we are at the center of the universe, even if we are a heliocentric
but what's
solar
interesting
system.
is some of the false arguments that the scientists of the day were coming up against Copernicus and his ideas.
Oh, go for it. Yeah.
And you know, one was that they would say the wind would blow at a continual speed, and they figured out that it would be the Earth would be going at a rate of 55,000 miles an hour around the sun. And if that was the case, then the atmosphere would blow away. And so they had no idea that the atmosphere was actually moving with the Earth.
I know.
And then the other question was, well, if we're going at such a great rate of speed, why aren't we feeling its movement? Well, they are confusing acceleration with inertia. You know,
I know. That's
engine energy, and so. And then what prevented everything from flying off the Earth in this scenario? What prevented the Earth from falling into the sun? These are all questions that they were asking. And
by the way, I think they are legitimate questions. You have to base your questions on the knowledge you have for the day,
Mm-hmm.
but you have to realize there may be new knowledges that came up or new things to do, and that's what the scientific principle, I think, should be about. Which by the way, Doug, I don't see that in evolutionary biology, evolutionary thinking. They are fixed into a certain way of thinking, and don't let a creationist foot step in the door. So they're the ones. To me, you want to talk about, Doug, the argument against the church is they used authority to heavy-handedly suppress Galileo and earlier Copernicus. But I think the absolute opposite is the case today. We live in a secular tyranny, where if you dispute the evolutionary framework, the naturalistic only explanation for the universe, the Gestapo scientific thought police come in there and step on you, and how do they do it? Again, I don't believe based on scientific arguments. They do it on authority.
That's right.
The very thing they accuse the church of in the Middle Ages is what exactly the scientific community does today. And if you don't believe me, ask Jerry Bergman, who got denied some of his.
So you hypocrites out there, don't repeat the same thing that you are accusing the church of. Let's consider the scientific arguments for creation, and and take a look at what the Christians are espousing from a biblical point of view, and test them and see if they hold water scientifically. And the argument that the church held back scientific progress, here's some examples of the people who actually supported Copernicus.
And of course, we're talking about the Catholic Church, the Middle Age Church right
yeah.
now. We're not talking about Protestantism was just sort of getting its foot in the door at this time.
Yeah.
They really, during Copernicus time.
Well, one of these guys is a Protestant, so.
Yeah, I'm just saying it's down the road, but I mean Copernicus was not, neither was Galileo, you know.
But the first one was Pope Leo X.
He was a supporter.
He was a supporter. He liked Copernicus's ideas. He read his treatises, and he asked him to help him with the calendar, which Copernicus didn't think that there was enough evidence, accurate measurement of the length of the Earth for him to, of the year for him to help with that. So he didn't get on that project. There was Pope Clement Clement the Seventh.
When was he around? Was he good?
I think he was afterward.
Okay.
And Cardinal Schoenberg and Andreas Auslander. Schoenberg was a Catholic. Osiander was a Protestant. They helped him publish his works.
Okay.
Pope Paul III also supported Copernicus in his work.
Oh.
So
So
the
he was-
opposition in this case was primarily from the academic community. And so, this is a great article that Jerry Bergman wrote, and I have, as I was looking at it, I was saying, where have these guys come up with these arguments against Copernicus, because they're not supported by the facts. If you go back to the questions that they raise here, it's really based upon false assumptions.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's also preconceived notions, what they want to believe. This is very typical of oftentimes when people, I've noticed that, the old thing when the analogy when you point the finger, three point back at you,
Mm-hmm.
I've noticed that oftentimes the things that we're accused of are the very things that they actually do. They use ad hominem, they use lies and deceit, they use obfuscation, and they use preconceived notions, a priori assumptions and beliefs rather than the actual where does the data fall. Yet those are all the things we're accused of doing, Doug, because we do hold to a biblical
That's
worldview.
right, yeah.
You know?
And our knowledge about science, even before the turn of the last century, was minuscule compared to what is known today.
Oh yeah, Doug. How many scientific things Jerry's documented vestigial organs.
Mm-hmm.
We deal with those things. They're all there. We have. I don't think there's any now that they claim to be vestigial.
Right.
That's just
They
one
have
thing.
found the purposes for most everything that they were claiming was left
cell-
over from evolution.
The cell was about as complicated as a blob of jelly, maybe a soft marble or squishy marble. They didn't have any idea of the stuff that was involved in the mechanism of this living cell. It's unbelievable.
And we know that junk DNA is not junk.
No, yeah.
We know we're starting to learn what all these things mean and do. It's actually code about code.
Right. Isn't that amazing? I think I knew that, I just suspected, again, from a biblical viewpoint, that God didn't create junk. The thing, Doug, it reminded me is that you've talked about this for many times, that really DNA is sort of like a three-dimensional, we found now really a four-dimensional computer code.
Yeah.
But unlike our computer codes, where we got all terrified in Y2K 15 years ago, there's no basic language. God got it right from out of the box. Mm-hmm. And what's happened is, since then, things have broken down. But again, Doug, those are things that we didn't know anything about. We didn't know DNA last century. We didn't know. There's so many things. But the junk DNA was, to me, vestigial organs were removed from a macrobiologic sense, so they had to go down deeper. And so then the DNA, okay, now this is just leftover evolutionary stuff. Nope, it's not. It's all functional. It has purposes and meaning.
Yeah, and as we continue to discover what God's laws are all about, we need to be quick to change our thinking, especially when we were wrong. And I
That's
think
hard to do, Doug.
It is.
And let's face it, you have 1,500 years of Ptolemaic geocentric teaching, 1,500 years. And that the fact that they were able to change that in a couple hundred was kind of amazing to me. Well, you mentioned two guys that were earlier, but they must not have got a lot of traction.
No.
It wasn't until Copernicus came out but again, there's a lot of support. I'm kind of amazed how quickly they were willing to look into these claims. And when the telescopes came up, it became even more evident.
And really what we need to understand is that these were churchmen who actually provided a lot of those foundations for science.
Well, that's the other issue, argument too. Real science came based on a biblical worldview. The world wasn't created by a bunch of dreams or gods who are capricious or just happenstance. There was a design, a plan, and a purpose for what our world is. That's a whole big thing. That allows you to build principles on the idea that there's a consistency of the natural world.
Stanley Jackie is
yeah.
a fellow who proposes that argument that Christianity is the foundation for modern science.
Well, it is.
And rather than making it a pariah to science or opposing science, and let's face it, there is a lot of resistance to change. It's very difficult to change your thinking in this area, and evolution is really one of these things that is a perfect example of that.
So, although surprisingly, it's difficult to go back. That they glommed onto evolution very quickly. Mm-hmm. Talks more about the heart of man than it does about the science behind it, because they really wanted to find a way to get rid of God. And that's what I've seen. We've talked about that over and over again, Doug, but ultimately what it amounts to, you have to examine your own hearts. Do you subscribe to evolution mainly because of rebellion against somebody who has the right to tell you what to do? Is that really why you hold on to this theory? And that's a question only you can answer for yourself. Sometimes it's because that's all you've been taught and that's all you know. But look at the claims objectively and see if the biblical worldview doesn't hold up as well, and I believe it's far superior to the naturalistic evolution.
It certainly is. We hope that you enjoyed our show tonight on Copernicus. And investigate the claims for yourself. Investigate the history. Did the church really hold back the progress of science, or was it the origin of the progress of science? We'll see you next time on Revolution Against Evolution.